way to understand what each of your players needs, and then also like don't overload on guys that are full of talent, but maybe like void of being
Mm-hmm.
able to receive criticism.
This quote that we are starting with is, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but it's a habit," right? And I think structure flows nicely into this, right? Because it allows us to perform consistent actions within a structure that, hey, maybe do develop into a habit. So it's funny because one of the first questions that we had for you was, well, when scouting, what do you look for? And it sounds like humility is one. But are there other things that you really look for in terms of how they carry themselves, lifestyle wise, mentally, physically? If you're willing to share some of that secret sauce.
No, absolutely. Definitely, this is like one of those things where it's like, as a chef, like you want to just like present your dish and not necessarily always talk about like what you did the night before to
Exactly.
sort of do all the prep. But I'll share some with you, of course. In this case, yeah, humility definitely reigns supreme for me, just because it goes back to the whole principle of feedback. And I know I'm like beating this drum. So if the viewers are getting a little tired of hearing it, guess what? This is like the same thing that my players deal with on a daily basis.
Feedback.
So welcome to trying to be a pro esports player in my system. But
Mhm.
yeah, so humility first and foremost, and I think on the flip side of that, certainly arrogance is one to be avoided. I think that like there's a lot of insight that can be gained about a player via social media. I think that like to your point that
Mhm.
you were just talking about, Matt, like one of the things I had written down while you were pontificating was like this idea of like it's hard to recruit players like this now because the rise of social media has like made it to the point where like this previous question, for example, right, where the guy said like I'm D3 and I have ladder anxiety. It's like, well,
Mhm.
how do we determine that we're good now on an individual level? Like a lot of it is what are other people saying about us when we post our clips on our Twitter profile? What are other people saying about us in our ranked game? With those thoughts, those external thoughts that we have no control over, to your point, Ryan, it becomes our reality and we can become prisoners to that reality as players. And it, like I said, it's one of those things that it's not happening just in the amateur level, in the amateur
Mhm.
space. It's happening in the professional space. And so, yeah, talking to players, really getting to know them on a personal level, I think that there are sort of three other key components that you look at, which is like going back to the ideas of structure is like what are their sleep schedules like what is their diet like, what is their physical activity like, do they have like a healthy support system around them, because it's always about balance and you're never going to find a player that ticks the box on every single thing. But as a coach, it's definitely important to acknowledge and be aware of like where are the gaps, again to the point that I made earlier, where am I going to be spending my time with a player. And the other thing is like talking about like what habits I look for when I scout a player. I'm going to be spending a tremendous amount of time with this person. Like, can I like this person? Right? Like, I know that's a kind of like a weird thing to say, but am I going to enjoy coaching this player 6 months from now? Or is it going to be like one of these things where I'm banging my head against my desk every time I watch them play because what they say and what they do are not in a line? So it's really important, I think, from a coaching perspective, use your emotional intelligence in a way to understand what each of your players needs. And then also like don't overload on guys that are full of talent, but maybe like void of being
Mhm.
able to receive criticism, because that just creates an environment where it's not really conducive for learning and growth, which again, from the organization top to bottom, that's really what we're about, is like upgrading humans. One other thing too is just like I place a huge point of emphasis on the beauty of the game. We have a couple simple rules on our team, which is like number one, like don't be late. Number two, don't overtrain. That's another big one. And number three is like don't disrespect your teammates or the game itself. So I know there's trash talk is cool and it's fun and everything else, but there are lines that get crossed very quickly
Mhm.
when you're a faceless person on the internet. So it's very important that the power of respect is just to never disrespect. And I look for that in players as well too, because again, I think it all just ties back into like, am I going to be able to have a difficult conversation with this person, give them this critical feedback that's necessary for their growth, and then are they going to be able to take it and run with it to become the best version of themselves, which is what I'm after when I pick up a player.
You scout for introspectiveness like that. I think that's a very unique quality to have in a player, a very important quality. At the same time, like I like that you scout for it. At the same time, what pieces of information, what do players do that you can glean that ability to look inside and take responsibility?
Oh, that's a good question. It certainly is not perfect in terms of like my methodology, but what I'll say is like if there's some core characteristics that I'm thinking about when I'm trying to be introspective about these types of things. Consistency, I think, is a huge thing from that perspective, because you'll see players that kind of come in and act the part, and then they'll go back to sort of their natural talents, right? This is like the same complex that you deal with as a manager anywhere when you're interviewing for a position. Like, you have to sort of take a greater sum than just the contents of the interview itself. So in this case, be like consistency in mind, effort, preparation, things like that. Also, I love when a player asks me, like, what could they be doing better, right? Like, if a player comes to me during a trial and says, hey, thanks for the opportunity, what did I do well and what needs work? That's a huge piece of like sort of them sort of showing their hand to you as well as a coach. And you're like, okay, this guy gets it. This guy understands that the only easy day was yesterday and that it's not going to be any easier tomorrow. And so, like, being able to be aware of, kind of your shortcomings as well as your strengths allows you to play with confidence around the ones that you do need. And again, like, spend some time sort of reflecting and learning about the pieces of the game that still need work. And then I think that ultimately, like, to go back to the quote that you had put up, Matthew, about the habits, I think this is just growth mindset in and of itself. And it's just the belief at like the most basic fundamental level that abilities can be developed through dedication. And that's really what this quote is saying here. And that's something that I value greatly in players. And I think with enough hard-hitting questions and enough time with a player as part of our trialing process, you can kind of begin to get a baseline, and you're making, as a coach, you're making a decision, and you're not always right, but you learn and you grow, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think it's funny because questions are really a window into how people think, right? And so I'm sure there are really great questions that you've iterated on in the past, and just something I've noticed, right? Like we always do sort of our preseason screening and try to get a gauge of the profile and the understanding and the thought process of the athlete. And one question is like, how do you approach improvement? And then maybe another one is like, how do you VOD review, and how do you approach it? And it's very clear when someone is a bit more reflective and has taken the time to think about the process, to think about how they improve, versus they're still early in those developmental stages of the cues for me, or the indicators are, oh, I just play. I just play to get better, I just play a bit more. Their response can be sort of an indicator of their, maybe we can say like their developmental stage of a professional esports athlete. On the flip side of the spectrum, I've gotten, I really take the time. I have a little notepad, and at the end of the day, I sort of write some things down that I've paid attention to, and I remember that either my coach said, or it was just something that I was thinking about, and I really wanted to remember it. And so every day when I go into the next day of practice, I'll think about that just to make sure I improve a little bit. Right. And so there's very clear differences in how people describe things. And guess what, guys? Those are habits, right? Those are habits that they've maybe through great coaching, through working with esports psychologists, or working with maybe just a performance coach, they're taught how to maybe approach things a little differently. And so, to transition to another question, how can players maybe build these effective habits? From your perspective of maybe there was a person that came in at that early stage, if the scouting didn't rule them out, how would you help players build better habits? And how can the viewers do it too?
I would say perspective is key. You're making this great point recently or earlier, Matt, and I was just thinking about like, be a really good note taker, right? Like, I encourage all of our players like to either like sticky notes on your monitor of like the key concepts that you're working on, because again, like, it's so easy to become obsessed over the scoreboard, or become obsessed over like what someone's saying about you on social media, or depending on like where you're at in your journey on this path of becoming an esports pro, you're going to be at like these different phases. But the truth is that the stage gets bigger, but the processes of the problems don't really change. And so when it comes to habits, it's like, A, identify the thing that you're working on. B, start really, really small. Find like that one thing that's going to act as though, if you can get to like the highest level of habit building, like it's like working out, right? Like when I work out, I don't try to eat better, but I just eat better because I don't want to waste the workout, right? It's like there's like a knock-on effect of me working out. And also it's like, well, now I'm probably going to sleep earlier because I've like tired myself out physically.
Exactly.
All these other added benefits to just working out that go along with it. Like one of the other things that I do on a daily basis, I meditate. That's like one of my first things I do when I get up in the day, is I just spend some time with myself, like alone with my own thoughts, and I just listen to them and I watch them go by. And that helps me a lot when I'm in either a dark place, or we've had a loss and I'm upset, and it's just like, this is just a moment in time. But I think the habits piece, to go back to your original question, ultimately, don't try to change too much too fast because we're not capable of doing that. One of the things that I really impress upon our players is like, we'll have, it's going to sound weird, but this is a great place to do it because we're on Will Take, is like August is aim training awareness month for us right now, and we're doing like these specific aim training routines and we're not obsessing over scores or anything else right now. We're actually slowing down to go fast. Like that's the whole point. Like being way more intentional about our practice so that it will hopefully, with time increase our performance. So the thing about habits at the end of the day is just start small, find the habit that's going to by default have these knock-on effects or these added benefits, and then hold yourself accountable or find a system that you can actually use to then measure that habit. And then I think the final thing is like, don't miss 2 days in a row, right? So like whatever habit that you're working on, if you like give yourself the grace to not be perfect, but don't let that habit go to waste by falling off the bike. Because once you've fallen off, man, it's hard to get back on. And the lies we start to tell ourselves just creep in.
Start small, find a structure, maybe bring your teammates in, bring your friends in to create some level of accountability, make it a little bit fun, do a team awareness month, maybe make it a little bit of a challenge that might add a little bit more effectiveness. But I mean, I think starting small is everything. Really, a lot of the times people look at the end and they think they can start there. And ultimately, it's about taking these baby steps to get there because it's that 1% more every single day. So I love that. I'm actually really curious, and unless Ryan, you had other things to add, I'm curious from our viewers. What trouble have you had with your habits, or what habits are you guys working on currently? And how can us three maybe help you guys think about your habits a little differently?
Yeah, we
But
have a hand, and a couple of your players are saying vouch, and it's one of my favorite
Vouch.
parts of the day. So more reinforcement of the stretching. Yeah, but we do have a hand here. I think it's Garfield if you want to bring him on stage
bring
or
him
them
on.
on stage.
Gary, hello.
My question was, I have a habit of not sleeping enough after like a long day because it's more fun to just keep playing. So I just fall into that, not getting enough sleep to be able to play properly the next day after that. So I end up not playing at all.
Wait, so you stay up way too late playing one day, and then the next day you don't play at all?
Yeah, because I'm too tired.
And so,
Makes sense.
just to confirm, the habit that you're looking to improve on is how do you, maybe in the excitement of playing a lot and wanting to play a lot, change that so you can optimize your sleep?
I have a couple of different thoughts. First of all, great question, Gary. This is something that I have seen some of even my own players at the professional level deal with, which is like this inability to just kind of wind down for the night. And there's a ton of different things, and I'm not an expert in all the fields, so I'll just focus on what I have found to be successful for me, which is like time bucketing. When I look at my schedule for the day, obviously I have like my meetings, my practice schedule, but then I also have like I kind of time I bucket for myself like times for things that I want to do. Like so one of the things that I do is I have some time like Monday morning when I first start my week of like an hour of just like thinking with myself of like really reflecting on the past week of work, and like this is like taking my end of day routine and like extrapolating it to a longer period of time to really sit and think about like how do I want to set up our practice agenda. So I think that if you could take that concept and apply that to maybe your own practice, right? Because practice without purpose is not the same as like practicing with intention. So whether that's limiting yourself to like maybe doing like a best of three at night, like a post dinner best of three, where it's like win, lose, or draw. I know that I'm getting at max 3 games in, so that's going to increase my effort. It's going to increase my focus. I think that's a good place to start for me, and at least like my thoughts on the matter.
I like where you went with that. I think for me, when I work with players like this is a very common issue or challenge. What I suggest is kind of what Coach Jay said is I asked them like, what are you practicing for? Like, what are you trying to do with the games that you're playing in ranked or whatever? Like, what are your goals? And then we kind of go over that. And then with my players, what I try to do is either schedule or budget their time and set boundaries around their training. So they're not overtraining, like kind of Matt was saying earlier, but they're actually able to have a purpose, have a goal, and able to limit the games that they're playing. And why I suggest this is because then it becomes something else. You now know that you don't have 20 games or as many games as I have to play to really get this thing down. Instead, I only have 3. I only have 5. And if you only have these games to really try and participate in or to really get that goal down, then it's a little more intentional versus I can play whatever. And then I think this is a really good question because we're talking about habits and routines. We're talking about your wind down routine. We're talking about your playing routine. We're talking about all these different things. And so I'm looking at the chat and another person was saying that they're only able to sleep 6 hours or whatever. Another question that we could ask is, how many hours of sleep do you need a night to be optimal? And we could do some science around this. Like you could just go to sleep and track how many hours you're sleeping and just have a easy Likert scale on the scale of 1 to 10, 1 being hot trash, 10 being amazing. How did you feel in the morning after you woke up? And over a week or two, you'll have a set of data to say, on average, I need 6.875 hours to feel 7, and that 7 is acceptable for me. So it really goes on, what are you training for? How, intentional do you want to be in your training? And what is your optimal hours of sleep so you can get that training out of the way or maximize that training? Other things we can talk about are like places and spaces. So for example, like, are you sleeping in your bed? Are you scrolling in your bed? Are you studying in your bed? Reserve your bed in your room for fun stuff and sleep. So when you hit that bed, it's time to go to sleep. If your phone is a problem, my suggestion is either A, get an alarm clock that's not your phone so you can put it away from your bed if you have zero self-control. Or if you do, make sure that you put that thing face down on your desk or wherever you can't reach it so you can charge it. So other things, depending on how good you are at regulating yourself or regulating these behaviors or different interventions. But I really do think it's understanding what you're trying to do in your practice and making sure that you're intentional in that practice to get the maximum out of it.
So Gary, I know we mentioned a lot. I want to give you some time to process and think about this. Are there any things that Coach Jay and Ryan said that stick out to you, that you were more attuned to, that you think you could adapt into your lifestyle, adapt into the day?
I feel like going over what you did during the day, that'd be like really helpful, because with me personally, I get very greedy with how much progress I'm making in a day. So I'll set a progress on a certain scenario, for example, static, then I'd feel like I get very greedy and go on to tracking. I could do the same and keep going until I eventually get very tired and can't do anymore. I feel like going over what I've done and what I've accomplished, going, what, I've done enough today, just move on, go do something else.
I think overall, right, the reflecting component and then using the time bucket concept of saying, well, I would just allow myself X or Y amount of training actions after dinner can limit yourself, but you also, this is where it's important, it acts as an objective way to say, if I do 3 games after practice, how quickly am I improving? And is that speed of progress what I'm okay with? Because again, you're reflecting not only on the day, but you're zooming out to say, am I also improving overall with this skill at the rate that I'm happy with? If the answer is no, you can change that. Well, let me do 4. But you want to give yourself time because habits definitely take time.